I don't know. All right, okay, I think we're ready to go. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Christopher Hahn. I'm the director at the Sturgis Public Library. And on behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council, welcome to the Festival of Books. We hope you'll enjoy the festival and that you'll provide feedback about this year's event. The link to our online survey is available at sdbookfestival.com, and QR codes can be found at our information tables, like the one right back here. You can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the South Dakota Humanities Council. To donate, visit sdhumanities.org or stop at the SDHC information booth at the Lodge in Deadwood. With your gift, you can enter our drawing for the original festival guide cover painting, which is right here. Not this one, because this is mine, but you can get the original. And it's Gary Steinley's the artist that did it. And for a $50 donation, you get an entrance. You get a raffle ticket, and then every $10 above that, you get another raffle ticket. So that's a pretty good deal, really. The festival wouldn't be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who have already donated and are acknowledged on the back cover of the festival guide. All right, now the good stuff. Today's event, which you know why we're here, right? Yes, of course you do. Writing for Kids in an Era of Book Banning. Our presenter, Gary Schmidt, is a prolific author of children's literature and young adult fiction. He graduated from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a PhD in medieval literature. So apparently he's giving this all in like Middle English. So good luck with the translations. I'm sure you'll figure it out. I'm sure it'll be very clear. So medieval literature has taught at Calvin University and Hamline University. Some of his recent novels include Orbiting Jupiter, The Labors of Hercules Beale, and A Little Bit Super. Schmidt has received 2 John Newbery Honor Awards. He now lives on a 200-year-old farm in Alto, Michigan, where he plants gardens and writes. And I just found out is newly retired, 3 weeks.
3 weeks retired.
3 weeks retired. So woohoo, good for you. And if any of you have advice for him, I'm sure he's ready to find that out. So please welcome Gary Schmidt.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So you are the ones who have persevered. You know, well done and good and faithful servants, right? I mean, you really have made it here. Thanks for coming late in the afternoon here. This is an honor for you to be here with you, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. As I was thinking about this on the plane, because I had written this all out as I tend to do, and then you throw it away, and then you think, okay, I'll try and do this again. And I'm thinking, wow, this is so discursive. I wonder if anyone will be able to follow it. So at the end, there'll be a test, and I'll let you know what pieces are on the test, just so that you can figure that out. So I'm going to start out talking about a book called Orbiting Jupiter that I did a few years ago. And this is a book about a kiddo who at age 13 has a daughter whose name is Jupiter, with another kiddo who's also 13. And it's the story of that kid and another foster kid who's with him. This is it's an intensely personal story for me, so I'll try to explain why and why that leads into book banning, as it were. A number of years ago, I was up in northern Michigan. It's April, and in northern Michigan, that means it's still snowing, and it means that there's ice storms and all that. And I had gone to meet several teachers who I was going to go with the next day to have a gig at a small school there. I was a little bit late, I was a little bit tired, and I got up to the dinner, and it was fine. You know, these 3 librarians that were great to be with. At the end of it, the 3 librarians said to me, we're going to go from here to a Reluctant Readers book club. Would you like to come? They're doing one of your books, Trouble. And in my heart, I'm thinking, no, I don't want to come. It's late, it's dark, it's Houghton Lake, Michigan, we're in Nowheresville. I really have 1,000 papers that have to be graded in the back of the car. My idea of tonight is get the papers, grade until I'm unconscious, wake up, grade until I have to go to the gig, go home. It seemed like a pretty easy thing. But they're librarians, and so you just know it's easier if you just obey librarians. Just sort of just do it and be okay. So we got in the car and we drove out of Houghton Lake, Michigan, into total darkness. There was nothing there. There's no lights anywhere, no houses, just drive for about 20, 30 minutes. And then we took a right-hand turn down a street, no kidding, that had no street sign and no lights. And I'm beginning to think, there's a Stephen King novel just like this. And it doesn't have the best ending. But we drove for a while, and finally on the west side of the street, there are some lights on a building. And the lights, as I just said, are on the building. They're not coming from inside. There are no windows. The lights are literally on the building. And we pull into the parking lot. It's been snowing this whole time. And I've been counting the minutes thinking, I have to get back too. This is going to be really late. And we get out and we approach this building, which has no sign on it either. And there is a metal door and a buzzer next to it. So one of the librarians hits the metal door. It clicks open. We walk in, and the metal door clicks behind me. And there's another metal door 6 foot in front of me. That one has, those windows that are vertical with wires through them? That one has that window, and there is a guard on the other side. And she has a walkie-talkie up to her face, which fascinated me. I mean, when's the last time you've seen someone with a walkie-talkie? I mean, it just really struck me how unusual this is. And she was ticked because she knew the 3 librarians, but she didn't know me. And I said, very cheerfully, I'll wait out in the car. Not an issue at all. That's fine. But it got sorted out, and the second door opened, and I walked in. Third door and fourth door. And after the fourth metal door had closed behind me, and I'm not claustrophobic, but oh my gosh, I find out where we are, and it is a medium security prison for boys, mostly middle grade boys, a medium security prison. I discovered that when there was a guard, big guy, who was standing there with this kid, sort of a little kid, and he's got his hand behind this kid's head, and he's shoved his face into a garbage pail, and the kid is throwing up. And I turned to the librarians who were with me, and I said, we're not in Kansas anymore, are we, Toto? And we weren't. Another door, fifth door, another door, sixth door into a room, and there are 12 kids, orange jumpsuits. 6 of them are from this facility, and 6 of them are from a maximum security prison for boys. Do you know there were those delineations? Maximum security prison for boys. And on the other side, each of them has a guard next to them, so those 12 guards, and then the 12 boys. And I look at the librarians, and I say to them, really? A reluctant readers book club? Really? So we went to the front, and I have no idea what I'm going to say to these guys. I mean, I've never been in a prison before. No idea what to say to them. And we get to the front, and the librarian says, why don't you tell Mr. Schmidt what character you found most like yourself? And I think, what a colossally awful question. There won't be a single person who speaks. And we're going to sit here, all of us, with silence. But it turned out not to be like that. There was one kid who raised his hand, and he goes, Henry. And I said, really, why? And he goes, Henry's athletic, like me. And I look at this kid, and I think, wow, you are not athletic. But neither is Henry in the book. It was really interesting to me. Another kid raised his hand, and he goes, Black Dog. And I know Black Dog sounds like it's a pirate or something like that, but Black Dog in the book he's a dog. He's a lab. He has a tail, he barks. And I said, really, that's the character you most identify with? And he said, yeah, I've always wanted a dog. And I look at this kiddo who's from the maximum security prison and who will not get out until he's age 18, and he will never have a dog when he's a kid. Another kid raises his hand, and he goes, Che. And I said, why Che? And he says, because Che's the kid who his father hates him, because every time he looks at him, he knows that this is the kid that was born after his wife was raped. And there's a long pause. And then this kid says, like my dad. Like my dad. It was an amazing evening. I'd never had any experience quite like it. In front of me, right in front of me, were 3 kids. Jamal, who sat there with his arm bandaged up. He had gotten into the kitchen and found a knife and had spent the afternoon cutting random numbers into his left arm, nothing else to do. Behind him was a kid, if you could imagine, remember John Denver? Remember that singer? If you could imagine John Denver at age 12, that's this kid. And even the glasses, even the haircut. It was like he was trying to look like him. And he says to me, I'm a writer too. And I said, so, what do you write? His name is Jake. What do you write? And he goes, I write about the planets. Jupiter is my favorite planet. I was awestruck. He lives in a place where there are no windows. He has a favorite. Do you have a favorite planet? Jupiter is my favorite planet, he said. When I got home, I sent him a poster of Jupiter and a book about the planets, which were both confiscated. He's not allowed to have anything personal. And then behind him was Joseph. Dark hair, dark eyes. He sat so dang tough. And he said, also, I'm a writer too. And I asked him, what do you write, Joseph? And he said, it doesn't matter. No one's ever going to see it. And I said, Joseph, send it to me. Here are librarians. You can give it to them next week. Send it to me, and I'll write back, and we'll go back and forth on it. But he never did. Joseph was taken to another facility, and he, I don't know where he is. So Joseph, Jake, and Jack, Joseph and Jack and Jamal. When I left, I knew that I would write about those kids. They are in 8th grade when I met them. They have been there a year. No kidding. This is America. 8th grade boys, been there for a year. In that year, none of them had seen a biological relative. The only people who came to see them outside of the prison facility are these 3 librarians who bought a book every week to them out of their own funds, not their own library funds, out of their own personal money. I think they should be in Congress. They are great heroes. So, as it happens, and anyone here who's a writer knows this, when you have an idea, often things come together and something else happens and you see it and suddenly it feels like, oh my gosh, this could work. And soon after that, I read an article in the New York Times about a kiddo in Arkansas. He was 13 years old. This kid in Arkansas, this is in New York Times, kid in Arkansas had fathered 2 children. He was 2 different women, different young girls, I should say. And the article was about that issue down in this particular state. And I thought, well, there it is. There it is. I don't know these kids' stories, and I wouldn't, the ones I met, and I don't think I would feel comfortable revealing them, as I wouldn't tell you tonight why those guys are there. But that's an interesting story to me. Suppose one of those guys has a child. And as soon as I say that, and as soon as I've told you the story about the kid in Arkansas, our first response, probably in the room, and reasonably so, is, wow, there is something really, really deeply wrong going on here. A 13-year-old boy, 13-year-old girl who have a child. But suppose it's the case that, in fact, that kiddo wants to be the father. Suppose he wants it. Suppose he feels compelled. Can you do it? No. Would any judge give a child like that over to a 13-year-old boy in terms of custody? Of course not. None of us here would even want that. But wouldn't it matter or account for something if that kid wanted to be a responsible father? Soon after that, because I said this is how things work for writers, I met another person from Maine. And I mentioned to her this idea, what I was going to do, and she gasped. And she said, that's Mark. And I said, Mark. And she remembered how at her 8th grade graduation, young Mark, a friend of hers, on the very day found out that, in fact, his girlfriend was pregnant. And she said to him, what are you going to do? And he said, no kidding. He goes, I'm going to go get a job. I'm going to go get a job. So all of those things came together. And I realized very quickly in all of this that art can amaze us. It teaches us about ourselves, doesn't it? And anyone who's a writer here or a serious reader recognizes that. So I began to write the book. I got about halfway through it, and it's a very short book, the shortest book I've ever done. I gave the narration to a foster brother of Joseph, who I used. I turned Jake's name into Jack. I gave the child to Joseph, and Joseph is coming out of a juvenile detention center, and will meet Jack. Joseph in the story has this child, who has been, of course, taken away by social services. About halfway through this, and it was going, I guess I thought, okay, my wife got ill. And I lost her 6 weeks later, Christmas Eve. And of course, the book stopped. I mean, there didn't seem any point. I stopped writing. I stopped anything like this. No gigs. I could barely teach. And after about a year, without doing anything like this or ever writing at all, I met a chaplain from a local maximum security prison, which seemed kind of right somehow at the beginning and now at the end of the story, who said to me, Gary, they're reading one of your books. Does it sound familiar? Why don't you come? You can meet these guys, 26 guys in a maximum security prison. And I said to this guy's name is John, I said, John, I'm just not doing this anymore. And he said to me, Gary, it's been a year. Time to get back in the game. And at first I was furious that he would dare to say this to me. But he was right. And he's a good guy. And so I went after an orientation that night to a maximum security prison in Ionia County, Michigan. I don't know if you've ever visited a prison before or gone through that process, but the orientation is itself very dramatic. You don't call the guys by anything but their last name. Never, never, never let them get behind you. Do not touch them. Do not let them touch you. Your panic button is state mandated. You never take it off. You keep your right hand not far from it, always. Never let them get in a crowd around you. Make sure they stay in their seats. And on and on and on. That night they came into the room. They were late because they had spent the day in their underwear because there had been so many knives discovered and they were destroying the cells trying to find them. Dinner that night for these guys was a piece of bread with a swath of mustard and some American cheese. And that was it. I thought they'd be super angry. And they walked in. And the first guy, his name was David, says to me, you can't believe what a blessing it is that you're here tonight. No kidding. You can't believe what a blessing it is that you're here tonight. I was not expecting that kind of language. And they came in, 26 guys, and sat down. And we then began to talk about the book. It was supposed to go for 40 minutes. It went for 2 hours, in part because they didn't want to go back to their cells, which makes good sense, right? But at the end of it, there were a few questions left. And one of them finally turned to me. His name was John Shank. I am not making that up. John Shank, which is just kind of original, amazing. And he says to me, well, we're going to go soon. I go, yeah. He says, we have something for you. And I thought, what could you possibly have for me? I mean, these are lifers. These are murderers and rapists all. They are not getting out. They will never get out. What could you possibly have for me? Well, as it turned out, the chaplain, John, had told them that the week before that I had lost Anne. And it was about a year, a little bit more than a year after that. And so they stood up en masse, and they came to the front of the room. They surrounded me. They came behind me. They were all touching me. And really super close. And I'm thinking, as you can imagine, not very good things. Plus, I was ashamed of the panic button. I just felt if I wore it, that it would look like I was afraid. And so I had taken it off. This is illegal. I had taken it off and left it in my coat of this table over here. There was no guard in the room. So it was just me and 26 guys who were now all around me. Part of this prison program. This was one night. It was just a sort of one-off. That I was going to become part of the prison program and work with them for as long as I could. And I have. for many years is Tuesday nights. And you go and they each read a novel, and we talk about it every night. My guys are not going to get out, and my guys are not part because of this program. And so the book meant a tremendous amount to me, and still means a lot to me. So it was kind of hard one night when I did a long scholarship program for my college, and at the end of that, one of the teachers that was at that program came up to me from a local school. And she says to me, no kidding, she goes, "You've put me in a terrible position." I had no idea who she was. This could be really funny, or it could be really crappy. So I said, "Really, how have I done that?" And she says, "Well, I've ordered 120 copies of Orbiting Jupiter, and I have stamped them all with my high school logo." And I said, "It's okay, so the terrible position is what?" And she said, "Well, I just read it." Now, you do want to think at that moment that you could say to her, perhaps it would have been wise to read the book before you bought 120 copies of it, and she hadn't. But she says, "I just read it," and I said, "Oh," and she goes, "You know," really, she said this, "You know, there's a 13-year-old girl who has a child." And I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know that." And she says, "I can't give that to my school." And she said, "There's just no way I can make that work." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, it doesn't really happen." And I said, oh my, you have no idea. I had talked to a number of pediatricians in Western Michigan, and they look at me like I'm an idiot when I say, "Could this happen?" One of them said to me, "Gary, you have no idea how many kids have kids in America. You have no idea." So I said that to her, and then her response was, "Well, it can't happen in our school." At which point you just go, oh man, I hope it doesn't, because that kid will never have any resources if it does. And it ended up with her saying, "Well, we're not going to read it, it's too smutty." And that was the end of our conversation. I hope they billed her double for all those books. But censorship happens sometimes right in the front of our faces and sometimes way behind us. It happens all the time in ways that are subtle and ways that are overt. It happens sometimes when the person goes to a library shelf and simply takes it off without saying anything, or it happens in a courtroom. But it's happening more than it has ever happened in America before. Those of you who used to think that the 1960s were censorious, it's not even close. It's not even close. I think about the books that were censored when I was a kid, and maybe some of you know books when you were kids, books that were censored. The Chocolate War, remember that one? Robert Cormier? Censored because the word shit appears in the first few pages. Can you imagine today if that's the reason? Or another book by Cormier, I Am the Cheese, which dared to suggest that perhaps government agencies might lie to us. I know, pretty daring. Also has the lovely twist in it that the phone number that's mentioned in the book of Adam's girlfriend is actually Robert Cormier's phone number. And if you knew the joke, you could literally call up Robert Cormier and say, "I love your book, I know the joke." A Day No Pigs Would Die, Robert Newton Peck, censored because there is a sex scene between two pigs. I'm not making that up. Lolita by Nabokov, for obvious reasons. Judy Blume, who I read in sixth grade. Catcher in the Rye, one of the greatest books ever written in America because of its language, as if we didn't know the words, apparently. Dr. Dolittle, censored in my school. I'm kind of on board on this one. The way Prince Bumpo is explained or is presented. QB7, Leon Uris, another great book, which was attacked because of its vivid representation of the experiments that were done by Nazis on their prisoners. A Separate Piece, and I'll Get There, It Better Be Worth the Trip, two early books that took questions of homosexuality seriously. Those were censored. Night, Elie Wiesel's Night, censored. I read all those. I read every single one of those books when I was in high school or younger, every single one. And I think when people today talk about why we need to censor books, I have to ask, well, I heard those same arguments. I think I turned out okay. Though I read Lolita, I didn't become this bizarre person. The only book I ever heard that was preached against in my church was The Exorcist, which my pastor said no serious Christian would ever read that book. Well, of course, on Monday, I went to McLean's drugstore. I mean, of course, right? I stopped, it was $1.95, it had a glossy cover. I stuck it in my backpack so my parents didn't see it. That night I read it, and I knew what it was. It's a horror story. There were some words there I'd never seen in print before. That was interesting. But I didn't come out of that really scarred. I mean, you know what it is. Much of the censorship in the books I've just mentioned is really about imagery or about language. And I still think about that at times, as if somehow I was going to turn into Holden Caulfield and use the F word all the time because I had read Catcher in the Rye. That's just bad thinking. It's just bad thinking to censor a book just because of that, as if somehow reading about the Holocaust was going to damage me somehow, or that disturbing image in The Exorcist would turn me into some bizarro person. It's really just bad thinking in many ways. But today, the difference in censorship today is extremely important to understand. It's no longer about imagery. It's no longer even about language so much. We've shifted it to something else. We've shifted it to hating people. That's the big difference. It's not just, I hate this book because it uses the F word. It's, I hate this book because the people in it I don't like, and I wish they wouldn't be here. That's terrifying. But let's just say it. That's where we are. That's what we're doing. We've shifted from issues of language to the dislike of people. We've gone from thinking of America as capacious, that's Abraham Lincoln's word, capacious, to something frighteningly else. This is Lincoln's approved text for a campaign song. You ready? We'll build us a temple of freedom and make it capacious within, so all those who find it may enter, no matter the hue of their skin. That's his campaign song. How about that? I'm not sure many people would even know what capacious means now, but never mind that. Now, I'm not interested here today in fighting culture wars. Oh my gosh, let's not do that. I'm not interested in the large sociological arguments. I don't even know if in America right now we have the right forums in which to have those conversations, because it seems to me anytime we head in that direction, we quickly move to anger and accusation and judgment, that somehow you are the bad guy for daring to believe this or that. We don't have the forums to make it work. And it feels like the discussions right now can only work in small, intimate meetings where you have discussants who trust each other and perhaps love and respect each other. I don't know any large public forums in which you can have that right now. I hope there are some, I'm just not seeing it. But what I do want to talk about is what book banning does to Americans and what it does to our writers and to us as readers here, how it affects us because of the way it's being conducted. So, to start with just a single case a long time ago to set us up. It's amazing to say that the 1980s are a long time ago, but they are, I guess. A book called I Am the Cheese, Robert Cormier, we mentioned before, which becomes the center of a major case in Florida. And in the early 1980s, there was a Florida school in West Palm Beach that had extremely low reading scores, extremely low, I mean disastrously low. And they decided to do the right thing, and that right thing was to hire new teachers who were skilled at reading and teaching reading. And so they hired 3 teachers who then came into the schools in West Palm Beach and brought with them excitement and competency and just engagement. They began to ask students to be part of the choices of the books for classroom libraries. That was at a time when the idea of a classroom library was a new thing. Today it's, of course, quite common, but back then it was new. And so they asked students to help them raise money and then go to all the different places you can buy books to have them be part of the choosing. And they began to put books in the classroom, books that kids would like. In the next couple of years, they would cull the books that weren't read, sell them, and then continue to build the books. Meanwhile, these teachers, who were very, very engaging, just made it cool to be reading. And it became even a sort of status sign to have a paperback book in your left back pocket. I don't know why left, but there it was. It was your left back pocket. It was really exciting. Are you surprised to learn that the reading skills or the reading tests soared? I mean, it completely changed the tenor of these exams or the school, and kids were reading because it was cool, which is exactly what we want, right? We don't want them to only read books which are assigned, but to go to a cool one. The day came when one of the teachers began to choose I Am the Cheese. And there was this, and that was an all read. It wasn't in the library that they had put in their classrooms. And a parent came in and objected to the book, objected particularly to the notion that the government might lie to us, and said, I don't want my kid reading that. Good teacher, she understands. She tries to think the best of this, and she simply says, I will find another book for your kiddo. The response back, as you might predict, is, no. That makes my kiddo different from everyone else. It means I want the whole book out of your classroom. You can't teach it. She objected that one parent should not have the right to take the book away from everyone in the classroom, and it went to the principal. Do you think the principal caved or supported? Supported. He said, no, she's right. We can find a book that for your kiddo, maybe even on a similar topic, similar genre, but we're not going to take it out from the entire class because of your objection. The parent, who was a very, very efficient person, decided that he would take this further and would take it to the school board. In order to get on the school board docket, there had to be enough petitions, signed petitions, so that it would become part of their agenda. And so he, with other folks, began to get the book, those signatures. They gathered more than enough signatures to question the book and to see whether the book should be banned. In fact, they gathered a surprising number, perhaps because West Palm Beach isn't that big a place. And so a reporter from one of the small local papers decided that she would check it out, and found out very quickly that many of the sheets were signed multiple times. You can only sign it once, obviously. And when she looked at the addresses, she discovered that in fact many of the addresses were outside the school district. That is, from people who should have no say in this. And she reported on that in her local 6 o'clock news. I tell you the truth, the next thing I'm about to tell you actually happened. The morning after she reported that, she woke up to smoke. Someone had gone to her condo, had poured gasoline under her door, and had set it ablaze. No kidding. This is America and censorship issues. She was, of course, terrified, but the report had already gone out. One of the 3 teachers who came quit. Who could blame her? So, despite the fact that there probably weren't enough signatures, the thing did go a week later to the school board. There were a tremendous number of people there, most of them against the book, though most of them, of course, had never read the book. And in fact, the school board was bullied into voting it out and saying that any book now would have to go through a rigorous reading process through the whole school board and through public forums. And when I say any book, I mean any book. All those reading of the classroom libraries, they were banned until any one of those would go through that process. Please imagine that. Every single one of those books, hundreds, through the entire school board with a public forum, it would be centuries. That was then challenged by the school because this really was a cool principle. And it took, of course, several years. The 2 remaining teachers eventually did leave before it was resolved. And eventually it was resolved. And the Florida Supreme Court ruled that it was completely irresponsible to make that kind of a decision about how to have books done. And so they reinstated all the books except for I Am the Cheese and another book called Go Ask Alice. Those two books were banned permanently. But the damage was done. Damage in the community, of course, the damage to the reading program and to the reading scores and to everything that happens in the classroom. Now that's one case, and I grant you it's a dramatic case, but it's not so unusual in America that this is where our book banning has gone. And today, now 40 years later, it's significantly worse. These are stats from the New York Times what is today? Saturday? Thursday, the day I flew in here. New York Times, just 2 days ago. Over the last 2 years, they say, not only have the battles increased in number, but in ferocity. And they have gone past school library bannings, which are the easiest ones to do, and have now gone to public libraries. That's the new target, public libraries. That means that, of course, that you can't say any longer, well, it's not in your school library, just go to your public library, because it isn't there either now. A number of libraries are facing things like defunding or cutbacks in their budget or, no kidding, bomb threats. This is America, bomb threats. Where I live, there's a small town, Jamestown, very small, very rural, lovely school, lovely library. Their public library was completely defunded in our last election, completely defunded. They had some books that some people didn't like, enough people didn't like, I should say. In the United States last year, there have been 700 attempts to take books out of public libraries that are documented, 2 a day. Of those, that's only the ones that are reported. Most, of course, are not. By far, most are not. In terms of the number of titles that are attacked today, or last year, the number of sheer titles, it is a staggering 1,900. I'm not sure I could come up with 1,900 books that might be objectionable. 1,900 individual titles that are attacked. Most of those are against characters or by writers who are diverse. In other words, again, this isn't about just the language or the images. These are people we don't want in a capacious tent, apparently. Together, school challenges and public library challenges last year amount to 3,362 challenges, 10 a day. And again, those are only the reported ones. In Florida, which is the most banning state, and followed by Texas, in Florida, 1,400 titles are now banned by law. No kidding. 1,400 titles. We have never had anything like that before. Never, ever. Again, most of these are on certain kinds of subjects. This is banning mostly from the right. Not exclusively, but mostly from the right. Certain subjects in Florida are now so hot that whole shelves are simply emptied. You can't have any book on the subject at all. And again, there is so much more gray censorship where you have books which are simply plucked. And I don't want to have any fight, so let's just take it out. What does this do to a library? What does it do to a librarian who are the custodians of our literature? Well, here's what it does. I was just down to Texas a month ago. I went to 5 different libraries. In none of those libraries did I ever raise the question of book banning. I never talked about it with them or never started the discussion. In every single library, it was very quick to come up from their point of view. I met a woman, a librarian, who told me about the 3 times when she came out of her library, this was a school library, late in the afternoon, and there was a large Ford truck waiting right behind her that drove right behind her all the way to her house until she pulled into her driveway. Met another one who told me about how she now regularly has a check-in with police. No kidding. So twice a day, she has a call from the cops just to be sure that she's still okay. That's because she has received so many death threats. death threats. I met a woman, a librarian, who, weeping, said to me, here's where I am. I'm a librarian. That's what I do. I train for that. That's my whole vocation. That's what I'm called to do. I now am facing this. I can listen to those people who are demanding that I take the hate you give off of my shelf, and they'll leave me alone. Or I can be a librarian who stands up to that hate and lose my job. Those are my two options. And she says, I have a young daughter. I'm a single mother. I keep my integrity as a librarian and I keep the book on the shelf, or I lose my job. What should I do? Well, what'd you say? She has a baby. Of course you're going to say you've got to keep your kiddo safe for the hate you give. Another librarian who told me about going to a school board meeting and who has a book challenged by someone she doesn't know in the meeting, who stands up and challenges, says, you have this book on your shelf. Well, she had sort of anticipated this, she said, and so she brought with her her computer, and she opens the computer and she says, here's my entire card catalog. Not card, we don't use that word, do we, anymore? Boy, I'm so old, oh my gosh. Here's my entire collection. We don't have the book that you're complaining with. It's not in our library. Here's the whole thing. Just look at it. And the woman says to her, oh no. And she goes like this. All of us here know that you librarians have a secret shelf. Really. You have a secret shelf, and you match up books like this with certain kids that you choose. We all know that, don't we? She says. She got applause. Now, what is this librarian going to say? I mean, what? No, I don't. I mean, what is she going to say? There's no way you can prove a negative on that. And so now that stands. That somehow she's hiding certain books on a secret shelf, and that she's targeting certain students to give it to. No kidding. That's what happens. And again, most of what I'm telling you is, of course, from the right, but it's not just from the right. In one MFA program that I was associated with, there was a formal discussion over this question: should white men be allowed to publish books for children? Come on. And I'm in the room. I kind of have a little bit of stake in this issue. And the words that really struck me was, be allowed. Should we allow people to do this? So it's not just from the one side. Now, the optimistic part of me wants to believe that these are good people, that they are just thinking about their kids, that they want to have a voice, that they think that maybe there are issues with these books and they want to be able to have part of the choice and they're involved. I want to believe that. I really do. But it's hard. It's hard for me to believe that. I wish I saw that same energy directed at gun control. I wish I saw that. If you're so worried about kids in the school, let me see that. We live in America where there are 1.2 guns per person. In America, 1.2 guns per person, which means that if you invite any 10 random Americans to a party and say, bring your guns with you, there are 12 guns in the room. Come on. The highest cause of death for an 8-year-old in America, gun violence. That is the highest cause of death for an 8-year-old in America, gun violence. Unbelievable. And just for heaven's sake, can we just read the amendment? Which, if you suddenly read the Second Amendment, you will see that it does not guarantee the right to own a gun willy-nilly. It doesn't. Just read the damn thing. It says only for the purposes of a well-regulated militia. That's what it says. Just read it. It is not the case that everyone is guaranteed the right to have a gun. It just isn't. But, well, anyway. So how are writers to work in a world like this? How is it that we can do that when we have to know that our neighbor might kind of like to ban your book? Or maybe it's the person sitting next to you in your religious service. Maybe it's your uncle. How do we write for that? Richard Peck says that anyone who writes a book, anyone, has to realize that there is going to be someone out there who wishes that you hadn't, and will have some group that will fund him or her in his attempt to get rid of it. Now that feels a little bit too much to me, but it's an interesting take that someone is going to object to your book, so what do you do with that? So how do we work in this world? How does a writer work in this? Well, at first I think, the first thing that writers have to think about, and perhaps readers as well, is that novels, poetry, books are not Hallmark cards. Hallmark cards are good things. I like to get them on my birthday. I like to get them on whatever. But they're not novels. They're not stories. Stories, by their definition, tend to make us uncomfortable. They're in an arc that brings us to discomfort and then to some sort of comfort at the end, maybe. But they do tend to make us uncomfortable. And I think we tend to forget how uncomfortable they can make us. So take, for example, probably the best known story in the Western world, the story of the Good Samaritan. I'm kind of assuming you guys know that one, right? Yeah. Oh, guys, say yes to me. Yes. Okay, you're making me a little nervous right on that one. To get a sense of how radical that story is, I mean, the Samaritan there, when Jesus tells this story, everyone gasps that it's a Samaritan that does this. They can't believe it. You can just hear them gasp. Retell that story with just a few easy changes. The guy who's beat up and is lying on the ground in need is a respectable, state senator. The state senator is maybe very conservative. The kid who stops to help him is a trans high school kid. Write that story. That's how radical what Jesus' story is. And then get it published in Florida. And then watch it be banned. Radical stories do that. I mean, that's what they're about. And if you're upset about things that might upset you in terms of religious issues, well, read Job. How can you read that book and not say, dang, is God that whimsical? You should be disturbed by that. And if you're worried about sexual scenes in your text, well, I read the Song of Solomon when I was 14. I thought it was wicked cool. Art, stories are meant on some level to make us uncomfortable, but they also give us more to live with. They show us light, they show us a way. Or as one close friend says, art gives us more to be a human being with. Art gives us more to be a human being with. Or even think of it this way. Ruskin, who is probably the most boring of Victorian writers, who I could never read in college, who I thought only wrote to bore people to death, published a 40-volume, no kidding, set, I think just to see him in print. I can't believe that anyone ever read all that stuff. In one of his really boring essays with the really boring title called Science and Art, he spends about 40 pages doing really boring stuff to you. And then it's almost as if he pauses. You could almost just see him pause and says, okay, maybe I should write something interesting. But whatever it is, but he just pauses. And then he says, if you really want to understand what writing, what painting, what music are, if you really want to understand what art does, he says, you have to first love what art loves, the world. You have to love the world. All writers have to love the world. Will they question it? Of course. But they'll love it. They'll love it. I went to a number of different sessions this morning, all from children's writers. You just sit there and I'm thinking, these guys love the world. They love the world. They love the things that they can do with it. They love the tactile feel of it. Dang, Henry, who would not want to live on that farm after listening to you? And James, eating a mammoth? Who could not love that? You love the world, says Ruskin, and then you can be an artist. But you got to love the world first. We need to remember that in an age of censorship as writers. We love the world first. Or think of it this way. In his De Rhetorica, Augustine writes about the responsibilities of the writer. And he says, is the writer, am I okay on time? I've kind of like no sense of it. I'm just going to keep going until you yell at me. 4 minutes? Okay. Augustine says this, what should the writer bring to the reader? What's the responsibility of the writer? And he says, is it beauty? And then he goes, yeah, the writer should bring beauty into the world and should bring beauty to a reader. And then he says, anything else? It's like a catechism. And he says, understanding and knowledge, that too. The writer should bring beauty and understanding and knowledge as well. And then he says, anything else? And he says, wisdom. The writer should bring wisdom into the world. Beauty and understanding and knowledge and wisdom. And then Augustine says this, if the writer begins with any of those things, any of those, he's got it all wrong. That's not where you begin. He says this, the writer begins with this, how does my art serve? How does my art serve? How does that happen? For the writer today, book banning has got to be background noise. It just has to. It can't let us, however, just be listening to that. Are there going to be practical concerns about book banning? Of course there are. Will it affect publication chances? Yes, it just will. But if that's all you think about, then you're going to be a hack. You're going to write to the book banner. You're not going to write out of your heart. Should you consider carefully your language? Of course. Should you think about the effects on your reader? Yes. Should you consider carefully the question, is this my story to tell? Of course. Of course. But once you've done that, and done it fully and seriously, then write the book to delight, to bring wisdom and beauty, to serve. Because is it not the case that a book serves our society if it begins to bring up questions about institutional discrimination, as in the hate you give? Isn't that a service to us all? Is it not the case that a story about a trans kid can speak love and gentleness to a reader who's considering issues of sexuality and gender? Isn't that at least kind? Doesn't that serve us all? Is it not the case that a book that helps us to understand a Muslim family's experience in a Western culture, something that serves us all? Shouldn't it help us all? Is it not the case that a book about abuse, perhaps even sexual abuse, might for the first time help a reader understand that this is not normal, that this is wrong? Isn't that service to us all? Is it not the case that reading a book like Jared Krasowski's new one, his Sunshine, a hard read about kids with mortal illnesses, is it not the case that instead of hiding readers from this, even young readers, that it's important to show courage and honor and the nobility of these kids who will only be with us a short time? Isn't that service? If we begin to judge as writers and as readers books in this way, maybe we can get past the craziness of this banning. How does the book serve? And maybe if we can say to a banner, you know what? Begin here. Make sure you've read the dang book. But tell me this, do you get any beauty in it? Do you see understanding and wisdom? Do you see wisdom? Do you see the book serving us? That's the community we foster, guys, as readers and as writers. We foster a community where art can do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to give us that which will make us greater and stronger and fuller and wholer human beings. That's what art has always done. Let's get back there. Dang. Guys, thank you so much. Thanks so much for being here. I think we